The haunted house of Monte Cristo in Australia. If you think you've seen or heard enough scary stories to never be impressed again, think twice. There are places in the world that carry something much darker than legends or dubious accounts. Places where fear isn't just a feeling, it's a presence. Monte Cristo is an ordinary house. It's not just old, not just a stage for tragic stories. It's a silent warning that some things never die. Something was wrong from the moment I set foot there. It wasn't the smell of aged wood, nor the oppressive silence hanging in the air. It was something deeper, as if the house knew I was there, as if it had been waiting for me. I don't believe in ghosts. At least I didn't. But after that night, everything I thought I knew about reality crumbled before my eyes. And now, I'm here to tell you what I experienced, to warn you before it's too late. The call of Monte Cristo. I don't know exactly what led me to Monte Cristo. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe the need to feel something real, something beyond predictable routine of my daily life. Some people collect stamps. Others dive into terror to feel alive. I was part of the second group. I had visited supposedly haunted places before. Abandoned houses, hotels with macabre stories, even cemeteries in the middle of the night. I always left with the same feeling, a shiver down my spine, but nothing beyond what my mind created. But Monte Cristo was different. The accounts about the house were disturbing. People fainting for no reason, voices whispering in the silence of the night, objects moving on their own. There were even stories of visitors who left and were never the same. Some got sick, others disappeared. Still, I didn't let myself be intimidated. I packed my bag, grabbed my camera, and hit the road. The path to the property was long and deserted. The twisted trees around seemed to watch every movement, casting shadows that danced as the wind cut through the silence. When I parked my car in front of the mansion, I felt something unusual. The house stood there, imposing, as if it had been carved by time itself. Dark windows stared at me like empty eyes, and the rusty iron gate creaked at the slightest touch. It was at that moment I realized I was no longer alone. The first steps into hell, the main door of Monte Cristo, was heavy. As I pushed it, I felt the resistance of years of abandonment. The air inside was dense, charged with something invisible but palpable. A strong smell of mold and age had dominated the environment. But there was another smell behind it, something metallic. Blood? I shook my head. It was my mind playing tricks. The floorboards creaked under my feet with every step. The entrance hall was decorated with antique furniture, paintings of faces that seemed to follow me with their eyes. The house was in perfect condition, but something about it felt wrong, as if time had stopped inside. My first mistake was ignoring the instinct to leave immediately. I set up my equipment and started filming. The silence was so absolute that the sound of the camera's shutter echoed through the hallway. Every door I opened revealed a new piece of the house's history. Rooms with beds covered in white sheets, a dining room that seemed ready to receive guests who would never arrive. And then I heard it, footsteps upstairs. My eyes fixed on the staircase. The sound was slow, dragging. It wasn't the wood creaking with age. It was someone or something. I swallowed hard and tried to rationalize. Maybe an animal had entered the house. Maybe it was the wind. But deep down, I knew Monte Cristo was alive, and it knew I was there. I should have left at that moment. But instead, I took the second step into hell. The room that should never be opened. I climbed the stairs slowly, trying to control my breathing. The railing was cold to the touch, almost as if it were covered by an invisible layer of ice. With each step, the footsteps became clearer, and then absolute silence. The hallway on the second floor was narrow, lined with a faded red carpet. There were several doors, but one of them at the end of the hallway seemed different, older, as if it had never been opened. I shouldn't have touched that doorknob. The metal was warm, an absurd contrast to the cold around. When I turned the knob, the door opened with a snap, revealing a room covered in shadows. And then something moved inside. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was a shadow, but not an ordinary shadow. It had weight, it had form, and it was looking at me. My instinct screamed for me to run, but my legs seemed glued to the floor. The figure began to crawl forward, slowly, as if it were trapped between this world and the next. The air grew denser. My chest tightened as if something invisible were crushing me. The room seemed to stretch, the walls pulsating as if they were alive. And then a voice whispered in my ear, close enough for me to feel the warmth of its breath. "You shouldn't be here." My body reacted before my mind. I ran, stumbling through the hallways, rushing down the stairs. My only thought was to get out of that house. But when I reached the front door, it was locked. Monte Cristo wouldn't let me leave so easily. Trapped in the house of the dead, I pulled the doorknob hard. Nothing. The door was locked. My eyes darted around the dark hall, my heart pounding against my chest. I knew I hadn't locked that door. But there I was, trapped inside the most haunted house in Australia. The air seemed heavier with each passing second. My hands trembled as I searched for my phone in my pocket. When I pulled it out, the screen flickered for a moment and went black. No signal, no light, just a distorted reflection of my own face. I was alone, or at least that's what I wanted to believe. Something moved upstairs, a dragging of feet, slow, rhythmic, the same sound I had heard before. But now it was coming down the stairs. My body froze. Every instinct screamed for me to run. But where? The windows were sealed, the door locked, and the only way out was a staircase that led back to the unknown. It was then that the house made its move. The lights, which had been off, began to flicker. Paintings on the walls shook as if something invisible were passing through them. The floor beneath my feet seemed to vibrate, as if a strange pulse ran through the structure of the house. And then the sound, a whisper, low, dragging, coming from all directions. Indecipherable words, but they carried something within them, a weight, a threat. It wasn't my imagination. Monte Cristo was talking to me. The mirror of the curse I needed to hide. I can't explain why, but something inside me said I couldn't stay there. My eyes darted around the hall, and then I saw them. The mirrors. There were several throughout the house, in old wooden frames, covered in dust and years of neglect. But one of them was clean. I approached slowly. The mirror was tall with a golden frame, its glass so polished it seemed like a portal to another world. That's when I noticed. My reflection wasn't right. At first, I thought it was the lighting, the fatigue. But when I took a step back, it didn't follow me. The man in the mirror was still standing. My breath caught in my throat. I looked into the reflection's eyes, and it smiled. A crooked, wrong smile that didn't belong to me. Suddenly, the mirror shook. A crack appeared right in the center, spreading like black veins. And then, a terrible sound. Something was scratching the glass from the other side. Something trying to get out. It was enough to make me run. The lady of the house, I threw myself into one of the rooms, slamming the door behind me. The room was small, with antique furniture and a strong smell of burnt candles. A canopy bed took up much of the space, and on it, a Victorian dress was laid out as if someone were about to wear it. I was panting, my heart racing. My eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of danger. And then the floor creaked. On the other side of the room, a rocking chair began to move on its own, slow, rhythmic, as if someone were sitting there. The air turned icy. That's when I saw her, a female figure, standing in the shadow of the room, wearing a long black dress. Her face was pale as marble, her eyes deep like pits of darkness. She watched me, without blinking, without moving. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I was paralyzed. Then she whispered, "You entered without permission." My mind screamed that this wasn't real, that it was just the effect of fear, of suggestion. But my body knew the truth. Monte Cristo had chosen me, and I was beginning to understand what happened to those who never left. Prisoner of the past, the woman's gaze pierced me like a cold blade. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Then she began to approach. Her feet made no sound against the wooden floor. Her black dress dragged as if it were floating in the air. With each step, the room seemed to shrink, the shadows swallowing everything around. That's when I noticed something. She wasn't stepping on the floor. My muscles reacted before my mind could reason. I threw myself against the door, turning the knob in desperation. Locked. The air was suffocating, as if I were inside a coffin. Behind me, the rocking chair stopped. The silence was deafening. And then I felt it. Something touched my shoulder. Cold, icy as death. I turned on impulse, but the woman had disappeared. In her place, only the empty dress on the bed. But before I could process what was happening, a new sensation hit me like a punch to the stomach. The room was no longer the same. The wallpaper was yellowed and torn, the ceiling covered in cracks. The smell of mold was unbearable. Monte Cristo wasn't just scaring me. It was dragging me into the past. The heart of the house, my mind struggled to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was fatigue, maybe it was my imagination. But then, the door opened on its own. Not violently, not with a bang. It just slid back, as if someone on the other side had decided it was time for me to move forward. I left the room hesitantly, feeling the weight of the darkness stretching down the hallway. The house was different. The paintings were now covered in stained sheets. The red carpet seemed worn, full of dark marks. Blood? The silence was absolute. There was no wind, no sound of insects, nothing. Just a muffled noise of my own heart pounding in my chest. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, a slightly open door. There was something wrong with it. The shadows around it seemed to pulse, as if the wood were breathing. A cutting cold came through the crack, spreading across the floor like mist. I should have walked away, but it was no longer a choice. Monte Cristo wanted me to enter. The eyes in the darkness, my steps echoed on the hollow floor as I approached. Every cell in my body screamed for me to retreat, to run and never look back. But I was already inside the house's game, and it wouldn't let me leave without discovering what was behind that door. I pushed it open slowly. The room was small, almost claustrophobic. The walls were covered in scribbles, cut-out words, disjointed phrases. They are here. I see everything. Don't leave me alone. And in the center of the room, an old iron bed, and on it, a body, covered by a dirty sheet, motionless, my lungs locked. I knew I shouldn't approach, but my legs moved forward, as if something were pulling me. I lifted the sheet. There was no one. The bed was empty. But then I heard the breathing, coming from above. I raised my head slowly, and there, on the ceiling, clinging like a spider, a face stared at me. Wide eyes, a wide smile, and then it began to descend. The visitor from the ceiling, I wanted to run. My body begged to move, to flee from that cursed room. But I was stuck to the floor, my muscles stiff as if Monte Cristo had grabbed me by the legs. The creature on the ceiling began to descend slowly, with impossible movements, as if its bones were broken and remade with every moment. Its eyes didn't blink. Its smile was something no human should ever see. Then it whispered, "I've been waiting for you." The air became unbreathable. My lungs burned as if they were being crushed. My ears rang, and before I could react, it fell. On top of me. The scream that never came to impact threw me to the floor. A supernatural weight pressed on my chest, icy hands gripping my wrists. I tried to scream, but my throat was sealed. It was there, inches from my face. And then came the worst. It opened its mouth. There were no teeth, no tongue, just a black hole that seemed to suck everything around. And from within that void, a sound began to emerge. A cry, not an ordinary cry, the cry of a baby. And in that instant, something inside me broke. My body reacted before my mind. With a final surge of energy, I pushed the thing away and dragged myself back, my back hitting the cold wall. The entire room shook. The scribbles on the walls seemed to move. The bed creaked as if something invisible were on it. And then silence. It had disappeared. But I knew Monte Cristo was still playing with me. The door that shouldn't exist breathing heavily. I forced myself to stand. I needed to get out of there. I staggered down the hallway, the shadows around me moving in impossible patterns. The air felt heavy, as if I were walking against something invisible. And then I saw it. A door. It hadn't been there before. It was made of dark wood with a golden doorknob, different from everything else in the house. and from behind it, I heard a low, constant sound. Someone knocking. Knock, knock, knock. The sound wasn't desperate, wasn't frantic. It was rhythmic, as if whoever was inside knew I would open it. I approached against my own will. My hands were sweating, my breathing irregular. I gripped the doorknob, and then the voice came. Please help me. It was a child. My heart raced, my mind conflicted. Nothing in that house could be trusted. But what if it was real? What if someone was really trapped there? I shouldn't have opened that door, but I did, and I saw something I can never forget. The child who never grew the door opened slowly, revealing a small, suffocating room, lit only by a candle about to go out. The smell inside was different from the rest of the house. Damp, putrid, as if something were slowly rotting. In the center of the room, there was a child's bed. The yellowed sheets were crumpled, as if someone had just gotten up. And then I saw him, a boy. He was sitting in the darkest corner of the room, his knees pulled to his chest, his thin arms wrapped around his legs. His face was partially covered by disheveled hair. But what made me freeze wasn't his presence. It was his breathing. It wasn't normal. It was irregular, gasping, as if each breath were a painful effort. I swallowed hard. Are you okay? My own voice came out trembling. The boy didn't respond. He just slowly raised his head, and I saw his face. Or rather, what should have been a face. There was something wrong with it. His eyes were too big, black like holes in the fabric of reality. His mouth didn't move as it should. It trembled, contorted, trying to form words that couldn't come out. That's when I noticed. His lips were sewn shut, and before I could react, a shadow crawled out from under the bed. The guardian of shadows, the thing had no definite shape. It was a mass of living darkness, pulsating, as if it had been kept in that room for too long. The boy didn't move, but his shadow did. It rose slowly, stretching until it touched the ceiling. And then, two white eyes appeared in the middle of it. The thing was looking at me. My entire body froze. The shadow moved, fast. Suddenly, I felt something cold crawling up my arm, as if small invisible hands were gripping me. I tried to break free, but the more I struggled, the stronger the presence became. And then, the voice whispered in my ear, "Now you are part of the house." The entire room shook. The boy disappeared into the darkness. The shadow pulled me back. The last thing I saw was a candle going out. And then everything went black. Monte Cristo never forgets I woke up in front of the house. The sun was already rising, tinting the sky a sickly red. My body trembled. My skin was cold, as if I had spent hours inside a tomb. But the worst came when I looked at my hand. On my palm, a mark, a symbol I had never seen before, burned into my skin like a branding iron. Monte Cristo didn't just want to scare me. It marked me. I got up with difficulty, looking at the house one more time. And in that moment, I knew I would never be alone again. Monte Cristo was now a part of me. And sooner or later, I would have to return.